WHAS, we are ripping through a Wednesday edition of the show. And joining me in the studio now, he is Dr. Rand Paul, running for the U.S. Senate. If you haven't heard about Rand Paul, you're trying not to, because he is everywhere in the news media, unlike his opponent, which we'll get to that in a little bit. I'm a little, and for the record, Dr. Paul, thank you for coming in, first of all.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
I need to offer a little disclaimer. Every time you come on the show, I get these nasty emails from people calling me everything but a child of God because we don't have your opponent on. We keep asking him. He has yet to come back on the show. I just want to make that perfectly clear. Just perfectly clear. We keep asking. The invitation is out there. We're trying to make it happen. But you're here. And you're here, and I got some questions for you. And I'm also going to take some calls, because you're going to be here with us for an hour, so people will have time to call in. But, you know, wherever your name appears now, I look at the headline, and there's a part of me inside that cringes. I'm not going to lie. It seems like, in some ways, there's two things at work. On the one hand, you definitely have at least two local newspapers that are working very diligently to make sure you don't get elected, and that's the Courier-Journal and the Lexington Herald. There is just such a naked dislike for you and your campaign in the coverage of your campaign by those papers. That has to be frustrating. You can comment on that if you want.
Well, my wife gave me a poem from Emily Dickinson, and it says, "Fame is a bee. It has a song. It has a sting. And in the end, it has a wing." I think I've felt the sting, and so it's not always great to be famous. But, you know, I think there is something wrong in our country, and I hope I can use some of what's happening to try to change things for the better.
Now, the second part of this equation is that in some ways you can't seem to get out of your own way. Now, I'm gonna share with you, and I don't know if you've seen this column from a pastor, and he shares the views. It's Herschel York. Have you seen this letter from Pastor
I've heard
York?
about it, but I haven't seen it.
Let me share part of it for you, and I'm doing this specifically because I, as a talk show host, and as an open and unabashed conservative, and as someone who shares a lot of the same viewpoints that you have espoused throughout the primary campaign, people will email me and ask me questions. Well, what's good? So I figured I'll share some of this because this, I think, speaks for a lot of people, and I'd like you to respond to this. I'm going to not read the whole thing, obviously, but Pastor York says in one section, "I see you desperately trying to assume the mantle of the Republican Party and of national leadership, but uncomfortable and apprehensive in its demands that clash with your libertarian past. I would like to like you. The moment you say you're 100% pro-life, you predispose me to vote for you. Protecting human life is surely one of the most basic and essential goals of society and law. Your message of limited government and fiscal responsibility is not only timely, but even essential to our national security and way of life. But then you keep talking, and you trouble me. You consider yourself a constitutionalist, but you question whether U.S.-born children of illegal immigrants should be entitled to citizenship, a question already settled by the 14th Amendment. You say you're against racism, and I don't doubt that, but I don't understand how you can even question whether or not the government should have a role in ensuring that the African-American members of my congregation can eat at any lunch counter they choose. How can I look my black church members and friends in the eye and tell them I voted for a man that doubts that? However you may feel about limited government, surely one of the primary jobs of government is to restrain evil, and allowing businesses to discriminate because of the color of one's skin is evil. I have lingering questions about your understanding of foreign policy, admittedly because of your father's views. Are you as isolationist as he? Are you in favor of closing our military bases in South Korea, Saudi Arabia, and Germany, for instance? What's your response to the dangerous North Korean regime, to the Somali pirates? The Tea Party has defined itself, if indeed it has defined itself, more for what it stands against than by what it stands for and how it intends to achieve it, and at what cost. It's one thing to say you think farm price supports are a bad idea, and quite another to say what you propose about the real human cost of moving to a truly free market in agriculture. And it goes on, and essentially it's this. One of the things people like about you is that you are I think I'm speaking for this, is that you are a constitutionalist. You seem to understand what the framers seem to intend, and you understand how far away our government has gotten from it, but yet there are all these contradictions that have popped up in various ways and places that have been expanded by the news media that I mentioned first. Who are you? I mean, that's really what it comes down to. Who are you? It just seems like your campaign has been a little bit all over the place in some ways.
Well, I think a lot of the definition is coming from a very liberal paper, and that's part of the problem. Let's start with, you listed a whole bunch of issues, but let's start with the 14th Amendment.
Okay.
And whether or not, if people break the law, come into our country and have a child, whether it's a citizen. Pastor York says that it's a decided question. Well, there still is an argument whether it is a decided question. The most famous court case, and the only court case really about this, involved two people who were here as naturalized. They had a green card. They were here legally and had a child. The Supreme Court did rule that that child was a citizen. This was back in 1898. There has never been a Supreme Court case on whether or not, if you break the law and are here illegally and have a child born, is that child a citizen? The 14th Amendment says you have to be under the jurisdiction of our country. That's the actual wording. Now, you can debate that, and the Supreme Court could decide one way or the other, but I say let's have a decision. Let's work it all the way up to the Supreme Court and decide, if you break the law and come here, are you a citizen? I don't think it's been decided yet by the Supreme Court. People say, oh, they're just insulting to me. Read the 14th Amendment and things like that. I have read the 14th Amendment. What I think we need to do is decide it. If it is decided otherwise, then the question is, should we amend the Constitution? I'm an originalist in the sense that I think the 14th Amendment should be interpreted the way it was written. It was written to give citizenship to the slaves and ex-slaves. Absolutely, that was a good thing and thing we had to do. Interestingly, to bring this up to date, it's also very current because we had the McDonald decision a day or two ago that says that gun ownership, or the Second Amendment, does apply to the states and to cities. And that has to do also with the 14th Amendment. It's applying due process to the states. I just read on the way up here Clarence Thomas's opinion. He was with the majority. He was a concurring opinion, but he also says that we should apply privileges and immunities, which is part of the 14th Amendment, apply that to the cities and states, and that the Second Amendment is an enumerated right, and it should apply to the cities and the states, and it's really one of the best decisions. Clarence Thomas's decision there and his dissent in Kelo are two of the best decisions I think that have been written really in the last decade or two.
Now, I got to do this. I got to take a very quick time out. We're going to continue this conversation. Then the second half of the hour, we're going to open up the phones for questions. We are with Dr. Rand Paul back in a moment on 84 WHAS. 84 WHAS in the studio with Dr. Rand Paul. I was reading a letter from Pastor York, and you were responding to some of the things. And truthfully, I don't want to talk about the Civil Rights Act of 1964 anymore. I'm done talking about it. You've explained yourself about this on the show. I personally agree with your question about overreach on the Civil Rights Act. And like I just said to you off the air, now that Robert Byrd is dead, actually voting against the Civil Rights Act, not a big deal. Because he did, and he's a saint now. So there you go. Let's move on, though. Let's talk about foreign policy. This is the other question I get from a lot of people, because the United States is just, we have so much stuff going on. The whole world seems to be melting down in a way. What is your stance on foreign policy? Would you close military bases in Germany, Saudi Arabia, and Korea?
Well, the interesting thing is we already did in Saudi Arabia. And it happened after Iraq, and when we went into Iraq, they said, well, now we have a place where we don't have to be in Saudi Arabia. So they acknowledged that there was a bit of a lightning rod having bases in Saudi Arabia. So we moved out of Saudi Arabia. We're more in Qatar, Kuwait, and other places now, United Arab Emirates, and in Iraq. So we are out of there. I tell people that foreign policy has two extremes. One extreme would be that we're everywhere in every war around the world all the time, and one extreme would be that we're nowhere. And I think maybe we need to be more towards the middle. Right now, I think we are closer to the pole that says we're in every conflict around the world.
We are the world's policemen.
Right. I think here's a good way to put it. I mean, the other day I was in Elizabethtown, and I met some GIs, 100 GIs going to Afghanistan, and I wasn't even scheduled to speak them, but they sought me out. Their lieutenant colonel came over and said they're leaving next week. They saw you over there, and they want you to come talk to them. So it was very much a spontaneous thing at their request. And I asked them this question, not whether we should pull out or leave or precipitously do anything, but I said, do you think that we're turning it over to the Afghan Afghani soldiers fast enough? Are we turning over the patrolling of the little villages, the hamlets, the mountains everywhere? Are they stepping up and doing enough? And our GIs, our courageous